Balenciaga is probably the single most talked about brand in fashion right now, but it wasn't always like that, even at one point closing doors altogether. So how did we get here? Balenciaga was founded by Cristobal Balenciaga in the 1910s. We actually don't have a hard date for when the business was set up specifically because he was working very successfully during his teenage years before he was set up as a formal business. His mother, Ghesquiere, was a seamstress for the Marchioness of Casa Torres, and it was she that taught him how to sew and introduced her son to the Marchioness, who would be one of Balenciaga's early supporters, meaning that high society women were purchasing Cristobal's designs when he was just a teenager. We know this from the outfit for his cousin Salvadora Egana's honeymoon, which he finalized in 1912 when he was just 17 years old. By the age of 22, he already opened his first couture atelier in San Sebastian, where he resided making clothes for the elites of Spain, including the royal family, with the house signatures of clean, simple lines and a distinctly Spanish take on French or sometimes British couture. However, shortly afterwards, the Spanish Civil War forced him to relocate to Paris in early 1937. Here, he would grow his business exponentially. Being an already well-established name in fashion, he was able to situate easily with the other fashion-heavy hitters of the time, like Coco Chanel and Schiaparelli. Then, by August of 1937, Balenciaga staged his first runway show at the Avenue George V Atelier, showing a collection that was heavily influenced by the Spanish Renaissance. By 1939, Balenciaga was heavily praised in the French press as a revolutionizing force in fashion, with buyers and customers fighting to gain access to his collection even as World War II began. The Nazis were a huge fan of French couture, and for the most part gave the couturiers the option to side with them and stay in business or be forcibly shut down. So, a large portion of the names that have longevity now have heavy ties to the Nazi party, including Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Hugo Boss, Dior, and of course, Balenciaga. Balenciaga would make garments for high-ranking Nazi women and in return would get to keep his atelier. According to this book, The Dressmakers of Auschwitz, along with the other couturiers who had similar agreements, he would have allegedly either have had extra hands through the prisoners or at least allowed them to reproduce his designs for the Nazi women. Though just to be clear, the book doesn't specifically name drop any designer label, only because the records were destroyed at the end of the war, so they can never be 100% sure which brands were and which brands were not using the Nazi slave labor. By the end of the war, Nazis had drastically reduced competitors to only a handful of companies, most of whom were struggling to find fabric in post-war Paris. However, due to his connections and infamy for his expert handling of fabric, a steady stream of fabric was delivered to Balenciaga from Italy, Spain, and France, many with exclusivity contracts, giving him a competitive advantage as really the only couturier that had this quality of fabric. He continued to develop his house signatures of clean lines and Spanish influence to almost completely remove the waistline by introducing several groundbreaking designs in the 1950s. To name just a few, there was the mantle coat in 1950, the balloon dress 1953, the high-waisted baby doll dress 1957, the cocoon coat 1957, and the sack dress also in 1957, as well as the Empire line dress in 1959. By the 60s, he developed this further and became known for signifiers like wide collars, heavy, mostly woolen fabric, and cropped sleeves, mostly on tailoring. But unfortunately, he was getting older, and at this time it was much more common for houses to be closed when the namesake designer chose to stop or had died. And so in 1968, really at the height of his success, he chose to close the house at 73 years old, only coming out of retirement once in 1972 to design Nazi General Francisco Franco's daughter's wedding dress, after which he died 2 weeks later. Following his death, as Cristobal wanted, the brand was supposed to be closed. But due to his nephew selling Balenciaga's name to Hirsch in 1972, just a month after he died, only the fashion side was actually closed while the perfumes lived on. That was until 1986, when Jacques Bogart acquired the rights from Hirsch to Balenciaga in the hopes of bringing it back from the dead in the same way that Karl Lagerfeld had just done a few years before for Chanel in 1983. Under Jacques Bogart, Michael Gomer, who actually died this year, was named the first head designer and was tasked both with starting the Balenciaga ready-to-wear line and opening a new ready-to-wear line under the label Le D in 1987, named after the first Balenciaga perfume from 1947. Just for transparency, some of the sources are saying that these are two separate lines and some are saying that they are one line, line, so I'm not actually 100% sure if it is 2 or 1 ready-to-wear line that the Balenciaga had in 1987. That being said, the collections only achieved mixed reviews. But that almost didn't matter because Michael Gomer, who was often compared to Karl Lagerfeld in the early 80s, clearly resonated with their audience. Under Gomer, Balenciaga saw decent enough sales to make the company viable again, especially with the reintroduction of furs to position the company into the luxury market again, and even the opening of their first Tokyo store. Following Michael Gomer came Josephus Melchior Timister, who was actually fired due to some really awful fashion shows that caused the audience to walk out, only then to be succeeded by a 25-year-old Nicolas Ghesquiere in 1997. Who is really credited with making Balenciaga into the luxury brand that it is today. To explain Ghesquiere's impact on the label is extremely difficult, honestly. To say that before Ghesquiere, Balenciaga was kind of plateauing, maybe even some say failing, is not an exaggeration. Ghesquiere took a brand that no one really wanted to touch or have anything to do with, and over the next 15 years would make it into one of the most interesting to watch brands in the entire industry. Even inventing the Lariat bag in 2001, which as you probably know is still immensely popular today. Even Gucci, shortly after purchasing Balenciaga in 2001, allegedly invited Ghesquiere to teach them how he did it. So they clearly understood that he was a true genius. But eventually it was his time to bow out, with his final collection, Spring-Summer 13, being classically Ghesquiere. Very minimal, slim silhouettes, and a constrained color palette, which is important to note because his replacement has all of the same qualities, which means Balenciaga knew they had a good thing going and didn't want to lose the momentum. Alexander Wang was named as the next creative head, and his years were kind of messy. Firstly, the brand tried to sue Nicolas Ghesquiere for quote-unquote hurting their brand image by saying that they were sucking him dry, which I honestly don't doubt if some of the rumors about the way that they treated him are true. Secondly, in 2013, Wang redesigned the Balenciaga logo for the first time since 1917, which kind of went against the brand's desire to continue Ghesquiere's Balenciaga. But also, thirdly, the brand was beating a dead horse with the minimalism thing, which was kind of past its maturity by 2015, so inevitably Alexander Wang left the label, citing a mutual separation. Which brings us to quite likely the reason that you clicked on this video, Demna Gvasalia. Demna was a pretty new person in fashion discussions in 2015 when he was named as creative director, having only launched his own line Vêtements a year previously in 2014 after being inspired by Martine Rose, which you can check out my video on her for more info on that. Clearly Vêtements had made tsunami-level waves in the industry for him to be so quickly appointed to one of the major houses. But Balenciaga's sales had been plateauing and they were ready to take a risk. Needless to say, their risk paid off. From the first collection, Autumn/Winter 16, he showed for Balenciaga, it was obvious that this partnership would be an immense success. He had checked through the Balenciaga archive specifically to reimagine the signatures of Balenciaga for the modern woman, and though the collection received mixed reviews at the time, I think it's quite obviously a successful interpretation. He brought through florals in a similar vein. This silhouette is obviously based on the sack dress, and we also saw wider necklines and tailoring. I'm not going to pretend like this is the best collection in the world, but to say that this collection was groundbreaking would be an understatement. Considering that this was really the catalyst for ugly fashion, Demna essentially proved with this collection that a luxury house could sell pretty much anything while still retaining their extremely high prices. Some of the pieces for the collection, especially these windbreakers and these puffer coats, are extremely cheap to make in comparison to a wool overcoat, but the price was still just as high, meaning the Balenciaga profits were through the roof. Also helped enormously by the new laundry bag. Once again, extremely cheap to make in comparison to other Balenciaga bags, simply because of how little manual labor is actually needed. This bag went completely viral for its price tag of £975, which would have been around $1,300 in 2016. The people outside of fashion just couldn't believe anyone would buy something that looked so plain for such a high amount of money, and that made people in fashion love it even more. This caused a lot of discussion and introduced us to the biggest staple in Demna's work, controversial design. Over the years, each and every collection has had at least one seriously viral moment or product that sends eyes and sales to Balenciaga, including the first ugly sneaker, the Balenciaga Triple S, the old lady laundry bags, IKEA bags, the Croc bag, Croc heels, Croc boots, and Croc platforms, the plastic bottle shoes, beaten up Converses, the smashed phone invitation, the snow show days after the Ukraine invasion, the Bernie Sanders logo, the tape dress worn by Kim, Kim's Met Gala look, The Simpsons, the Gucci collab, the Adidas collab, the Yeezy and Gap collab, and the celebrity couture show where Naomi almost got stuck in a door. I am convinced I've forgotten so many things from this list, so please let me know what I forgot. And if you're wondering about the sock shoe design, that was actually designed by Alexander Wang just before he left and then came into stores in late 2017 while Demna was there. So he was there, he just didn't design it. This marketing tactic so far has been exceptional. I don't know of another luxury brand that has managed to stay this relevant for the last 5 years so consistently, other than perhaps Gucci, although in my opinion I think Balenciaga has been more consistently popular than Gucci, who has had more of a spike when Michele came, and then a slow slope down since, but that's just my perspective, and of course it's definitely debatable. Until recently, there were 23 Demna Balenciaga shows, spanning from autumn-winter 16 until autumn-winter 22 if you include menswear, womenswear and couture, or 37 if you also include pre-fall and resort collections. Of all of these, there are 4 main standout collections: menswear spring-summer 17, women's wear autumn-winter 22, and both of the couture collections in 2021 and 2022. Firstly, the menswear spring-summer 17 show single-handedly made tailoring cool again. The show studio panel described the look as if it were reinventing tailoring to something that young people actually wanted to wear. I could not agree more with this. From the wide shoulders and oversized fit, it completely subverted these slender suits or no suits that were common previously into a younger silhouette, perfect for the next era of menswear. We hadn't really seen this kind of shake-up in menswear since Michele's first menswear show in autumn-winter 15 for Gucci, which came after a long drought in men's fashion following the popularization of the Hedi Slimane skinny boy aesthetic. I think the Demna silhouette furthered the conversation that Michele began in a way that made menswear exciting again, catalyzing the modern look of menswear today. The Women's Wear Autumn-Winter 22 show is by far the most emotional show, and it justifiably got a lot of media attention. Given that the Russo-Ukrainian war had just seen an increase of public awareness after Russia invaded Ukraine in the February of 2022, this collection that debuted mere days later revisited Demna's own experiences with war, specifically when he and his mother fled war-stricken Georgia when he was just 10 years old. Seeing the viewpoint of a war refugee that had grown up with the trauma this inflicted was so poignant to the conversation at the time, and naturally was incredibly emotional. From the difficult mise-en-scène to the darkened clothes and trash bags representing his experience with homelessness was more impactful than any previous collection. I think some people who were less into the fashion world misinterpreted the collection as disrespectful because of the timing, which with just a quick Google search would have explained that away. For the most part, the public reaction to this collection was one of extreme sympathy and empathy for what the great creative has had to live through, made publicly raw for Balenciaga. This is exactly what fashion is about for those that love it: intellectual and emotional expressions through the artistic medium of fashion. The 2 other extremely important collections made by Demna were the 2021 and the 2022 couture shows. 2021 because this was the first time in 53 years that the house had shown couture, having their couture house closed when Christobel died. So, the people that knew Christobel wanted the label to die with him were tentative at first, though excited to see what would be done. As it happened, the collection was an enormous success. Perfectly mixing the house codes with the new Demna aesthetic, the collection as a whole was far more sobering than anything Demna had put out before. Previously, he was known for an almost chaotic display of clothes, specifically rejecting the idea of fashion. However, with this collection, he seemed to really flex his creative fashion skills to produce the most cohesive collection that he's ever put out. Perhaps in an ode to the original Balenciaga métier, which saw many respectful elements included or disincluded in regards to the music. Autumn-Winter 22 couture was equally as successful, but this time in terms of media. It's undoubted that Demna is a master of media, so to bring that into couture was rather groundbreaking, though not without contention. Some thought that this was reducing the importance of couture, which is serious and exclusive in definition, whereas others find it inspiring that couture is being brought into the new modern era by embracing public opinion and social media. thus making this such an interesting collection. Not for the clothes, but for the questions that it poses, which remind me of Marcel Duchamp's urinal that posed the original question, when is art art? This time, Demna poses the question, is it still couture? Conceptually, this is just incredible. He has rethought the spectacle of couture for the digital age, and I have significant respect, not only for Demna for asking the questions, but for Balenciaga for facilitating this cross-examination of an industry where they are one of the main breadwinners. I'm well aware Demna has had many excellent collections under the Balenciaga house, more than I can mention in this video, but I thought it was important to talk about the most recent collection in Spring/Summer 23. Demna isn't necessarily a designer that makes the most beautiful clothes. That was never his genius, and instead what he brings to the table is an intellectuality to clothing that panders to the fashion interested, who in turn trickle down their love for the point of view to the masses who may not have actually heard that much about Demna or read the show notes to understand the perspective. It's one of the reasons why so many things the brand is putting out now causes so much controversy. And they know it too because it's their main marketing tactic. A tactic no different in this collection. He told the press that he has decided to no longer explain his collections in the future or verbalize his designs, but instead to express his state of mind, which he did in this statement that, according to the show notes, was a metaphor for allowing people to be themselves authentically while still being down to earth, which explains the muddy setting as well as the fact that Kanye West opened the show, because he, more than any other celebrity, is famed for being unabashedly himself. Demna is one of the greatest thinkers in fashion today, and I'm so glad his genius is recognized widely by the fashion interested. We always need people to question the industry to push it forward, so I hope he continues to trivialize the fashion world for many years to come. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one, or check out Glenn Martin's for Diesel, Simone Rocha, or just the full playlist of videos on the left.